So, the way that the government will work in the future is that it's going to have these processes that will basically turn the way that the information is being processed by the government in the empire is it has different levels of processing according to the dimensions 0 through at least 12, and I'll probably try to get it to go indefinitely if I can, but at least 12 dimensions of processing. And within those dimensions, the humans will identify the, 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 the variables that are then going to be automatically related according to logical standards, logical functions, and the overarching processing of Deus Ex Machina theory according to these dimensions and according to its understanding of their function, etc. So the humans identify something. The government system automatically categorizes that, whatever the thing is that was identified, and it builds a database of all the known things that exist within the empire, that the empire is aware of. Anything in existence. It doesn't matter if it's a number, if it's an equation, if it's a person, if it's a relation, a law, an event, a gun, a knife, a crime, whatever. So anything that you can think of, black holes, astronomical arrangements, all kinds of stuff, anything that you could possibly name, the government will keep a database about that. And it'll basically be, it will have the thing itself, whether it's a gun, a knife, a star, or an equation, it will have its name and or symbol, something that represents it, a word, whatever, what it's called, and its definition. So the thing itself, its name, and its definition. And basically that makes an encyclopedia. The government then allows free access to that encyclopedia. And that way people always have access to the facts. The way that this is built is the humans are shown in a group of example pictures or movies or sounds, and they have to cold recall, type in the matching name or definition or icon or whatever it is that is representing that. In order to build the encyclopedia, what they do is the humans just identify whatever the thing is that they're being shown. So if they're shown a whole bunch of pictures of fire hydrants, they have to type in the word fire hydrant. And the way that the system knows if they're correct or not is if that name, fire hydrant, matches at least 66.6%, 2/3 of their peer group that was asked or shown these pictures of fire hydrants. So if there were 100 people that were all shown, let's say the whole population of the entire empire is only 100 people. So those 100 people are then shown a series of pictures about fire hydrants. And if 67 of those people type in the name fire hydrant, then they all get a successful or passing score, those of those 67 people that put in fire hydrant. The other 30, how many is that? 33? The other 33 people all get it wrong because there was a large enough sample size that it was able to reach 66.6% matching of the total peer group. Now, if, of course, the empire is going to have more than 100 people in it, so there's going to be subsets of these peer groups. So you're going to have everybody in the empire constitutes the biggest peer group, right? That's the just general population. Then there's going to be certain groups that only they are able to identify certain things. And this is going to have to deal with things that are a little bit more specialized, that have to deal with stuff that you wouldn't normally come across, like advanced electronics or some kind of machinery in a factory that you wouldn't see unless you worked there, something like that. Technical instruments and things like that will only be able to be identified by a very small group. So what the system does is, if everybody in the empire gets shown a picture of one of these technical instruments and almost nobody can get a matching answer because they don't know what it is, they type in some random word and they don't match. What the system does is it looks for the largest agreement that was had by people, like the most common answer that people had. Even if they all typed in something random, there's going to be a most common word there. So the system will take that most common word and use that as a temporary template. And it says, okay, I'm going to temporarily create a new peer group, which is composed of all the people that had this one highest, most prevalent answer. And that will be a sub peer group, and its specialization is that it's able to identify this thing. And the way that it makes sure that that's the case is that it then retests that same subset that all had the same matching answer several times with more examples of that same thing. And it has to be the same thing. It can't branch off into some other category because we don't know which category it fits in yet. So it has to be the same thing that only they had matching answers on. And then they all have to match several times in a row. It has to be able to be replicated. It can't be a one-off fluke chance that they all happen to get it right, or they all happen to get the same answer, because that same answer might not be right. So that's how it weeds out the matching answers that just so happen to match but aren't actually the right answer. So it'll go through that from largest down to the smallest until it finds a peer group that can achieve matching answers more than one time, a majority of the time. 66.6% at least of the time they will be able to identify that thing. So that then builds a subset, and the way that you make it into that subset is you again have to identify that thing, whatever that thing was. The next person, if they want to be part of that subgroup, let's say again let's say it's a scalpel or something else that isn't not a scalpel. Let's say it's some kind of a medical instrument that most people wouldn't know about, and only doctors can identify it. Okay, so then if you wanted to be a doctor, then in the future, you're going to have to identify whatever that medical instrument was that only those doctors were able to identify. And then that will, as far as the system is concerned, make you a doctor. But you have to do a lot of those. You can't just do one. So it's a series of these things, and you have to be able to identify not only the instruments, but the correct usage of those instruments, because there's going to be not just pictures, but also movies that get put into there, and it'll show you operations, and it'll ask you, was this a successful operation or an unsuccessful operation? It might ask you at which point in the operation was the mistake made, if there is one. There's stuff like that that'll be in there also. So you can actually then, if you have enough of these, accurately actually not only identify people and everything, but you can also train people to become able to identify when something is going right and when something is not going right. Now, granted, all of that is theoretical, so it's not the same as if you were sitting in an operating room and actually doing it yourself, and I get that too. There's going to have to be a separate set where the person themselves has to actually undergo some qualification in the real world. But as far as theoretical identification, they can do that. That would be enough for, I guess you might say, the coursework for the degree. And then at the end of that, you would have more vocational hands-on training, where after you've made the successful attempt at understanding and identifying the theory behind the practice, then you understand the practice, and then you finally get qualified to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it is that requires these specialized peer groups ability to identify when something is going right and when something is going wrong, as well as how to apply that in the real world. The government then will keep all that information, and it will be able to then have that database, which is full of all known information, as well as these peer groups and sub-peer groups that are specialized in identifying specific types of things. And then it can expand that information about what something is into how is that thing related to one other thing. So you could take a fire hydrant and then pair it with, let's say, water. What is it about the water and the fire hydrant that is the relation between the two that makes them work together? What is the relationship between water and the fire hydrant? Well, if you unscrew this cap on the fire hydrant, the water will come out. Something like that. So it will keep a database of that also. And those are relations between things. So after something has been identified, actually, after at least two things have been identified, then you can also identify the relationship between those two things. Then after you build a one-dimensional database to compile all that information about relations between all the things that you have in the zero-dimensional database about what something is in and of itself, then you can compile all those relations between all the things in and of themselves, and you can find a contiguous volume of those relations that all compile into or compose a form, a two-dimensional form. So it would be an idealized Platonic form, a theoretical form. It would basically be the thing in and of itself as a form, as an idealized form. So the ideal of whatever that is. So that's where you form the ideals or the idealized forms of the things that are already identified. Because the things that are identified, the only way that you can show what that is to show a whole bunch of examples. But once you get to the point where you've got enough information about all the relations that it has between it and everything else, then you can make a form, an idealized form out of it. And you can make basically an icon that represents that. That icon, that idealized form, can then be paired with or related to other idealized forms in a spatialized environment. So that would be three-dimensional, because you'd have two-dimensional shapes interacting in 3 dimensions. And that has its own database as to how these idealized forms fit together to form spatial arrangements in the empirical, objective, physical world without time. Then you would have a 4-dimensional database for that same thing, except expressed along a time frame. So it would be, the relation between those two or more idealized forms interacting in 3D space across time, so that you understand what the linear causation is between these. So each of these dimensions, each of these databases, have their own causal nature. So the 0th one, the encyclopedia, is causally dynamic. It doesn't have a linear cause. It has a dynamic cause, because all words are defined by other words. So that's the causal dynamism inherent in the 0th dimension, which is inherent in the 0th dimensional database, the encyclopedia of all the known things, their names, and their definitions. Which, like I said, they all kind of interrelate to each other, because every word is defined by other words. And there's a word for everything. So there's a partition or a separate area for that. there's a partition or a separate area for every one of these dimensions, and every one of the dimensions is defined by its causal focus. So in the 0th dimension, it's causal dynamism. In the 1st dimension, it has its own cause. I don't know exactly which cause that would be, but there's, according to Aristotle, there's at least 4. There's efficient, linear, final, and formal, and material, excuse me. So, which one is it? I don't know. I'll have to do some more research into it, but each of those has its own causal nature. And what the government does is it compiles all the information that's known into a single centralized source that everybody has access to for free. And while it isn't a school itself, it is educational in the sense that it has all the information. Now, the educational system, basically all it does is it just makes that process streamlined. So instead of randomly searching for a scattering of all the stuff that you randomly look up on Google, it will build a course for you so that the questions that you ask go along a particular path, usually a career path, or at least a path that leads to some destination that isn't just the immediate answer for this immediate question. There's a series of questions that lead to an eventual answer. The educational system will do that, but the government itself, at least with these databases, that's not educational in that way. It provides for education, but it isn't a school. But it could be used by schools. So it's very useful. And what it does is it gives the nation a sense of solidarity. It gives the nation a sense of momentum. And it gives the nation a freedom for everybody to have the same access to the same correct information, so that there's not any of this misinformation bullshit that goes around, because you could easily fact check against it simply by what we normally call Googling it, but going, in this case, through the government. And it will just have all this information already there. And because the government does this in a decentralized way, and then only centralizes the depositing of the information as a final product, but the process of mining that information is decentralized so that it can't be colluded, it can't be corrupted, because it's just asking everybody if they can identify this thing. And it doesn't tell you what the answer is, it lets you guess. So if you guess it right, that's because you have access to this information that the same people in your peer group also have access to. Theoretically, it means that you have an innate understanding of that thing, whatever that is that you identified. But if not, then that gets weeded out during the process of just making sure that it matches. And over a vast enough peer group, then the possibility for collusion goes down rapidly, exponentially, really. If you've got more than, I don't know, like a dozen people or so, then you pretty much can't have any corruption anymore. After a certain limit, there's just no way to get everybody on board with doing something underhanded, because there's just too many damn people. There's so many people that you can't get everybody to do that, because it would be too well known. Like, people would know about it before you'd be able to even pull it off, because you can't do it any other way. Unless the entire population is on board with it, then you're not going to get it to go through, which is, the power of democracy. That is the only thing that I like about democracy, is that you can't ever have the government go against itself, because it's composed of the people that it's representing. So that the people would have to go against themselves for the government to go against the people. And that hopefully will keep people from colluding just by itself. But if not, at least, like I said, the vastness of those numbers makes it pretty damn difficult to get people to get bribed or whatever. Because usually, if not only, that happens in centralized governments where there's a few people that are in charge and everybody else just does what they say. In this case, there's no limit on the number of people that are in a peer group, except that they all have the ability to identify the same things. If they can't identify the same things, then they get kicked out of that peer group. They will lose their access if they're not able to get a satisfactory, if they're not able to repeat their success in identifying things the same way that everyone else in their peer group, or the majority of the people in their peer group, identify that as. So since that's going to have to deal with culture, etc., the system will automatically adapt to that, because it will just say, okay, these people over here all agree that this is this thing to them. These people over here all agree that it's that thing to them. And so they're two different ways of looking at it. Okay, which one's largest? That's the one that's the most popular. That's the one that takes the precedent. So in many ways, this government is actually democratic, but it's also slightly Republican, because it requires you to have qualifications in order to get into these peer groups. So they're not just pure democracy where it's one guy, one vote every time. It's, well, are your votes the same as the other people that are in your party? And then you can join that party. So it's sort of like a decentralized democracy, I guess is what you might call it. The power of that is that all the evolution, all the advancements in the society are all centralized, so that we all move forward together as one unit. Instead of there being some of these agencies like the CIA, the FBI, Alphabet, some of these companies or mega corporations of companies have access to things that no one else has access to. There's no transparency. This gives 100% transparency. Everybody will know, or at least if they don't know, they can know. And there's no warping of the search engine or any of that stuff. It's just direct access to the information. It doesn't go through a search engine company. It just gets processed by the exact same system that everybody else uses as a public utility. So if that thing isn't working right, then that's because the people that are using it are not using it right, user error. But like I said, over a vast enough number of people, not everyone's going to make that same mistake. There are going to be people who do. There are going to be people who lie. There are going to be people who cheat. But they're always going to be in the minority, because the average person isn't like that. The average person does want to tell the truth. And I believe in that enough that I can use that alone as the measure between right and wrong. Is I believe that most people are good. Most people want to tell the truth. They know what is going on. They can identify it. They get it. They just need to be given the chance. And I think if they are given that the empire that we will build will work. And so the power of that is, it's very difficult to corrupt, and it's very easy for people to freely access information that they don't normally have access to. Come on, thing. There it is.